Right. Welcome to another episode of the Speak for Yourself podcast. My name is Casey, and I'll be your host tonight. I'm so glad that you're here. I see a bunch of comments already. Let's bring in the guest of honor.
Hey,
Aidan, how are you?
good. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm excited for this conversation.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's been in the works for a couple of weeks at least.
Yeah.
Man, so I was introduced to you actually through TikTok. And I believe it was one of the videos about the cave systems and the missing people around those. I think, did you blow up from that specific video or?
It probably was one of those. I'm not sure exactly when you came across it, but yeah, my first video to really go crazy. I had like 600 followers on TikTok. I was making content that was mostly just like stupid libertarian comedy stuff. And then Stitch came across, or a video came across that was like, what's a conspiracy theory that you can't prove, but you 100% believe in? And I was like, oh, perfect. So I stitched it and I was like, so, these people keep going missing. And then the Native Americans all have these legends of like the Wendigo and skinwalkers and Bigfoot. And, I think, these two things mesh together really well. That's interesting. So I'm going to mention that. And I thought that it would be a funny little video for the 600 people who cared to follow me. And a couple weeks later, it had 7 million views.
That's awesome, man.
I was like,
that's crazy. I had kind of a libertarian parody thing that I was just doing for fun. And that's what blew up my page. It's nowhere near yours, I don't think. But it's crazy how one thing will hit and then you'll have other videos that just won't do as well, It's pretty entertaining. But yeah, I love your page, man. It got me super interested in all that stuff. And I kind of already was a little bit, but I had never like researched it or anything like that. So it's been awesome. How did you get into that? Were you always interested in it, or did you start after one of those videos blew up?
It's something I've always been interested in, the paranormal and history, folklore, all of that stuff since I was a little kid. My dad was reading Game of Thrones to me when I was like 7. Obviously not all of it, but he was leaving out certain bits that 7-year-old me was not prepped for. And to be honest, I'm not sure 17-year-old me was prepped either. But
no,
so I was always interested in that kind of stuff. And then I got into college, studied medieval history, got my degree in that, got a minor in religion, got a minor in history, got a minor in English, got a minor in one more thing that I can't totally remember off the top of my head. Classics, that's what it was. So as you can imagine with that spread, obviously for an English minor, you're going to read a lot. For a theology minor, you're going to read a lot. And then for the history ones, it was a lot more reading. And all of that, what you start to see is folk tales and stories and heroic journeys and things that all kind of tend to match up. And it's really fascinating to take a look at those similarities that you find with people from Norway and the Navajo. And then you've got people over in Africa who are doing the same thing. It's all these things that are either, you look at it and you're like, that's a universal human behavior. And it's so interesting. Or you look at it like, okay, all those stories are a little too close, like the flood stories that everyone has. Maybe there's something real to that. And I started asking that question, what if this is real? What if this story is actually about something that happened and over the course of millennia, it became, a mythical event, something like, something much larger than whatever they actually experienced, but still something they shared even from, the Middle East over to North America.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I can totally tell how the flood would cross over between so many different cultures and stuff like that, especially if it was a worldwide event as told. But things like cryptids and that are shared across different cultures, do you have any explanation for that?
There's certain ones, I will be completely blunt and honest off the bat. I don't think I have the answer, like the concrete answer for any of this stuff.
Sure.
I just connect dots and I see what the picture shows. And I try to do my best to be as in-depth and as careful with my research as I can. It's, if I'm researching somebody who went missing, it's not the conspiracy websites. It's not, just reading the story and being like, oh, look at this thing that happened. I sit down and I'm poring over news reports and folk tales and historical topics and everything like that every week for these videos. But I don't want it to come across that I know the answers, because I don't think I do. I think I'm just compiling evidence. That said, certain things like the uncanny valley, that's one of those ones that really
one creeps me out, man.
Why are we all so terrified worldwide of the exact same features? Why do everyone's monsters? And a lot of people will be like, oh, well, it's about sickness. Why do everyone's monsters have fanged teeth, long faces, sunken eyes? Why are there these archetypes of humanoid figures specifically? Obviously, you're going to be afraid of sharp teeth if you're afraid of predators, but why humans?
Can you summarize uncanny valley for anybody that's not heard of that term before?
Yeah, so the uncanny valley is a term used to describe a spot of human familiarity where you go from being more comfortable to suddenly very uncomfortable before you start to see somebody who looks like a person again. So you and I don't have an uncanny valley effect when we look at each other, because you and I are human beings. We both are racially similar. Like, it's, we're not going to feel any discomfort. You can see a little bit of, in-group bias might be considered something within the uncanny valley effect, where you have other humans who you recognize are human, but maybe you kind of like, that's not my exact type of human. So, a white person looking at an Asian person looking at an African person. But you're going to recognize that that's a human being, and that it's just your in-group bias about like, oh, well, they don't look like me, so maybe they're dangerous. Obviously, in modern society, we've overcome that, and we recognize that just because somebody looks different than you doesn't mean that they're dangerous to you. But with the uncanny valley, it goes a step past that, a step beyond people who are slightly, who maybe are, have a scar on their face or a pigment disorder. You get to a spot where you recognize that what you're looking at is almost human, but it's not. And so it's the recognition that something is human that makes us comfortable with them. When we see another person of another race, another, level of able-bodiedness, somebody who's got, who maybe had burns on their face and now they have the skin that's kind of melted together, we recognize looking at those people that they're human. And then our brain goes from, old like primate brain of that person, not me, that person bad, to that person, not me, but that doesn't necessarily mean anything about them. Uncanny valley is beyond that. It's when you get to, a great example is the Polar Express movie from like 2006, where everybody was like, why do all, like, they used motion capture and they look pretty realistic for CGI back then. But you look back at it now and they're kind of glassy eyed and the skin doesn't look right. There's just something wrong. And what I think is going on there, because if you look at where the uncanny valley starts, obviously you look at a predator that's not human and it's not going to set you off. It's not going to worry you at all. Or it's going to set you off and it's going to worry you, but it's not going to look human at all. And then as you move into more humanoid things like primates, porcelain dolls. Porcelain dolls are one of those ones that tends to trigger a lot of people, including me. Stuff that is just, it's supposed to look human, but it seems like an imitation almost. That's where the uncanny valley is. You look at the creatures from I Am Legend, the people that have whatever disease.
Love that movie.
That whole thing. Yeah. That would be an uncanny valley thing where you look at that and you're like, that's not right. And it makes you uncomfortable. It feels like a primal defense mechanism against something that existed. And so I wonder, looking at that, what would that be that sets off those specific bullet points? And my thinking is maybe another hominid species, but we interacted with and mated with Denisovans and Neanderthals. So it's not them. And the other ones that we found don't really have those attributes. So what if there's another one, another humanoid, maybe even within the Homo sapiens family, that used to hunt us, that used to kill us? That's what I wonder with the uncanny valley. Like, is that stemming from an ancient human predator? Or maybe from, something else, but that's what I wonder about it. That's what I think is going on.
Yeah, I find it interesting that you can have the uncanny valley effect on both a biological thing and an artificial thing, like a robot.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever seen I don't know if it's pronounced Ex Machina or Ex Machina.
Ex Machina.
Yeah, but they did a really good job at that.
Yeah. There's been a few of those. What was another one? Splice was another movie that had a like genetic alteration or something. It was just like, I don't like it.
Yeah, so it's
deeply
weird that
uncomfortable.
it works both ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you also think that it could be something more in like the spiritual biblical realm of like Nephilim or something like that?
Oh, cool! I get to say the fun stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure how
into it.
weird we were going to get on this one.
Oh, and hey, by the way, we have a bunch of comments, guys. If you have any questions for Aidan or myself, post a comment and we'll throw it up if it's a good one. All right, go ahead.
Yeah. So for me personally, you know, to kind of get into the more conspiratorial bubble that I like to sit in, I think that whatever that thing was back there in history, I think that if you're talking about the most rational possible explanation, other humanoid, we have no evidence of that humanoid existing. Nephilim, on the other hand, there's a lot of stories from a lot of cultures that involve some other race of human beings that were created via either the angels mating with humans, for example, is one of the. Also, to be clear, the idea that Genesis 6:4 is talking about angels mating, or Genesis 6:2-6:4, 6:1 to 6:4 is talking about humans, angels mating, is not it is not a consensus thing. You're going to find people who are very, very invested and studious on both sides of that argument. I take the side that these were the offspring of angels and men. That is what the Bible is saying. And then you get similar stories in Greek mythology, in Egyptian mythology, in Mesopotamian mythology, in Norse mythology. And I don't think that that's a coincidence. And of course, for those watching going, oh my God, not the Anunnaki thing, not Zechariah Sitchin. No, fuck him. Like Sitchin was an idiot. Not an idiot, but he was far too confident in his own abilities. The Anunnaki, the whole 12th planet Nibiru thing, that's not in Mesopotamian mythology at all. It's totally made up. He went and taught himself to read cuneiform, and then start. It's weird. What he did there was he tried to kind of do what you do with English, or with English words that have roots in Latin or something. You break the word up, you understand what the different parts mean. He tried to do that with ancient Sumerian, but the problem was he was breaking up words that we knew their definitions. Like we have Sumerian dictionaries. So we knew what the definition of the word Anunnaki was, but he broke it into two parts and determined that it was like the sons of Anu or something like that. Interestingly enough, there are, gods named Anu or Danu in Mesopotamian and related mythologies. And then there's also the Celtic goddess Danu and Anu, who serve similar functions, which is very interesting to me. But yeah, so for me, I think, the idea that there was a time when a few angels mated with human women and produced a set of superhumans, basically, that would absolutely fit with the uncanny valley hypothesis. It's just you go and you talk to somebody who's more science minded with that, and they're like, you're actually insane. You are crazy.
Well, sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, And
it almost usually is.
Yeah, I personally think that the flood story as it pertains to the Nephilim makes a lot more sense than just the earth was filled with sin, right?
Yeah.
No,
100%.
And then, Noah's bloodline was pure, and that's why he was saved, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I've had this argument with a few with some priests, with some other biblical scholars, and when I sit there and I look at the rest of the Bible, including the stuff that came before it in Genesis, look at what happens to Cain. Cain's the first person on earth to commit murder in the Bible. What's his punishment? He's not he's not killed. He's not washed away. He's not dropped into hell immediately.
He's cast out to walk the earth forever.
Exactly. He's cast out. He's banished. So why, if God won't kill one person for committing the ultimate sin, why would he flood the entire world just because people were being bad? That doesn't make any sense to me. What makes a hell of a lot more sense is that something happened that he had not like planned for. Which here's the thing about the Bible. Everyone thinks that, when you, and this is my interpretation, kind of the general knowledge about Christian theology is that God is both omnipotent and omniscient. He can do everything and he knows everything. But what does it mean to know everything? Does it mean that you know exactly what is going to happen? Or does it mean that you know all of the possibilities of what could happen? I would argue it's the latter, because we see throughout the Bible that God does not seem to absolutely know every single thing that's going to happen. That also wouldn't make any sense with the concept of free will. So maybe he set the universe in motion and then boom, immediately knew everything that was going to happen, but God's supposed to experience time differently from us anyway. There's the example of the book of Job. The Satan is walking to and fro in the earth, goes to this council of angels that apparently happens every now and then. That's just brought up in Job as if it's a totally normal thing to say. And he just starts questioning God about people only follow you because they have to. And God's like, have you considered my servant Job? And then let Satan ruin the man's life in every possible way. And Job, of course, the whole story is Job, the remaining with his faith nonetheless. I look at all of that and I'm like, that does not sound like a God who knows exactly what's going to happen, but rather a God who knows what could happen. If that makes sense. That might be
it's
blasphemous for some people.
It's like if my wife were to get me something for Christmas, I can check the bank statement and see what it is. But if I want to be surprised, I'm not going to do that. So
exactly.
That's kind of how the free will part works. He knows all the possibilities, but maybe he doesn't want to know how that part turns out until it happens, sort of thing. Who's to say?
Exactly.
So,
and also the free will thing,
yeah.
It's the whole concept is free will, is the central aspect of the Bible is mankind's free will.
Yeah, so another part of this I want to get into, another thing that you blew up for and maybe are more known for than the cave system thing, which I want to come back to that. We'll circle around. But you're also known for like being an authority on Wendigos and skinwalkers.
I don't know how I got here. Yeah, I think it's kind of funny because I definitely wasn't when I started making videos. I knew the cursory, stories I had read on the internet from when I was younger. Went ahead and started making videos and suddenly had a lot of people correcting me. The cool thing was when people were correcting me, I got to be like, wait. Can you explain that to me? So I got to kind of have the best possible way of learning anything, which is I said something wrong. And then I had 30 people in my comments like, hey, I'm from this tribe and here's what we actually believe. Or more commonly, that's wrong. Me saying, how is it wrong? And them saying, well, here's what my tribe believes. And then I can, compile all of these different people's stories and accounts. And suddenly, boom, I've got, a great sample set of information. And that's how I learned most of what I know now. Is obviously there was some research, some reading, a lot of research and reading actually. But most importantly, I would just reach out to people who told me I was wrong and ask why. What did I do wrong? And the one funny part was all the people who were like shocked that I didn't dig in and say, no, I am right. No, they were like, oh yeah, if you want to know, here, well, let me tell you. And that's how I learned that skinwalker and shapeshifting don't necessarily to the Navajo mean that somebody puts on the pelt of an animal and transforms physically, genetically into that animal. But that for a lot of Navajo skinwalkers, what they would do was sew together the pelts of different animals so you couldn't tell precisely what you were looking at and use it as a form of camouflage. So stuff like that you're like, okay. So that's where this came from. Because otherwise you go on the internet and they're just like, they travel the astral plane and they run at 65 miles an hour and they transform into this. And it's so much information. And there's very few people out there kind of compiling it and fact checking it.
Can you explain the difference between a skinwalker and a Wendigo? Because a lot of the times those two things are conflated and they're not the same thing at all.
They're not the same thing remotely. Skinwalkers are witches. They are human witches, medicine men that actively choose to do what they're doing. They do it for pursuit of power, wealth, fame, all these possibilities. You know, the idea is that you are doing something taboo, you are interacting with bad magic to enhance your own status, your own standing in life. And it's also, at the same time, though, it's not something that you're supposed to be open and talk about. It's not a good thing. It's not something that is something to be proud of. It's bad. It's a taboo. But there is structure to it, as far as I understand. There are, you know, if you want to be a skinwalker, you can go and you can find yourself a skinwalker, and they'll be like your elder, and they have meetings, from what I understand. Then with Wendigos, it's a completely different topic. It's somebody who commits an act of cannibalism out of desperation, murders, you know, usually it involves murdering somebody you care about and consuming their body, their flesh. And after that point, it's no longer a choice. It's not that you can choose to be a Wendigo and get all of these special superhuman abilities like strength, speed, ventriloquism. You know, it's not that you choose that and you can throw it off at any time like a skinwalker can. A skinwalker could throw away their pelts tomorrow and they would, you know, just be a person, because they have to actively do the stuff to be a skinwalker. With a Wendigo, it's something that consumes you. It's something that is within you, and there's a variance here. Some stories talk about these things as if they are totally mindless creatures that have absolutely no ability to think and do things for themselves. They just solely are interested in consuming human flesh. And then there's other versions where the Wendigo is perfectly capable of human speech and, you know, captures. There's one story I read from a Chippewa woman who said that she, God, what was it? The story she had been told was that there was a Wendigo and it kidnapped a human child. And of course, Wendigos are human, but they've kind of transformed into something else, is the idea. Kidnaps a human child and takes the child around with it, waiting for the child to be fat enough for him to eat it. Excuse me. Whew, it's almost 10 here. So brings the child around, cuts its palm open with a knife every once in a while to see if it's gotten fat enough. And one day the child needs food, human food. So he sends the kid into a Native American village and says, hey, you know, you need to go in there. You need to get yourself some food. And you're not going to tell anybody in the village who I am or what I am. And the kid goes, okay. And immediately tells everybody in the village his situation. Village puts together a group of people. They form a posse. They go out into the woods. They find the Wendigo and they chop him off. They chop off his legs and they leave him there to die. They go back a few days later. He's still alive, sucking the bone marrow out of his own legs. So in that version, the Wendigo is intelligent. I mean, not bright, but sentient. So it's a sentient being. It has self-control. It knows that, you know, humans grow and become more nutritious, I guess, over time. And then there's other versions where it's a giant with a heart made of ice that only has the ability to hunt humans, and that's all it thinks about. Like there's a version about a guy, this one's from up in the Hudson Bay area, who I can't remember his name for the life of me right now, but he's a great warrior. He's very tall. He's very strong. And there's a Wendigo terrorizing the population. He goes to fight it. And the Wendigo is also huge, like 20 feet tall. And they swing trees at each other and fight it out. And the Wendigo is extremely hard to kill. Whereas in the other story, the Wendigo wasn't all that hard to kill. Like they just had to take a few guys and cut off its legs. So you can see that they definitely had different opinions on what a Wendigo was and how dangerous it was, depending on where you were in the Algonquin world.
And they reside in different geographical areas of the United States as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's kind of conflated too.
Yeah. Skinwalkers, it's always funny when you see somebody who's in, like, you know, Massachusetts and they think there's a skinwalker hunting them. Mm-hmm. Granted, there's airplanes now, but seems like a lot of effort for a skinwalker to hunt you specifically when you're that far away from where it lives. Skinwalkers, of course, Navajo tradition, which would make them native to the American Southwest, the Four Corners region, specifically Arizona, Utah, Colorado, you know, New Mexico. Those are like where Navajo territory is. That's where you would expect to find a skinwalker. Wendigos, on the other hand, are Algonquin mythology, Anishinaabe. They are up in they're the northeast of the continent. So you're going to find Algonquin branches down into the Carolinas, The Carolina Algonquin spoke an Algonquin language, but we don't know precisely when they split off. The core of it is the Canadian Algonquin peoples of the like Great Lakes region. The Chippewa, the Ojibwa area is probably the best known, but you're going to see this legend spreading out basically the entire way from central Canada east, and then slicing down to the Great Lakes.
That kind of also goes along with the profile when you said that they kind of do cannibalism out of desperation. So maybe dating back in the old days, it gets super cold and there's nothing to eat. They can't find anything, that sort of thing.
Yeah, and they are pretty intrinsically associated with the cold and the winter as well, the Wendigos, whereas skinwalkers don't have that association whatsoever. Interestingly enough, the Navajo may be a tribe called the Naha from the Northwest Territories in Canada, specifically the Nahanni River Valley. There was a group that is said to have disappeared, a very warlike tribe that is said to have disappeared from its mountain home, basically overnight, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Obviously, that story has probably morphed over time. It probably wasn't exactly overnight, but it was quick enough. Probably the course of, their scout, the other Dene scouts were up there. They were like, okay, there's the village. Here's everything laid out. They go down, they set up their war parties. A couple weeks later, they go up and everybody's gone. That's probably how it went. And the thing is, the Navajo show up kind of abruptly around 1400 AD in the American Southwest. And the Pueblo people are like, who are you? So that seems like the timing kind of lines up, which would be interesting then, because then you've got another Northern Canadian Native American group who made their way down into the U.S. and brought a similar-ish legend with them, but not the same one. There might be no connection between these two things. But there's another one, though, because this is where it all ties together in a way. The Inuit have something that they call the Adlet. And the Adlet is it's like a dog man, basically. And they say those live on the mainland and that they are very violent, savage, cannibalistic, live in the woods, very primitive. So there's a lot of different legends about some sort of thing that's mostly human, almost human, that lives off in the woods and is savage, and you don't want to go near it. So all of these Native American tribes have their own different version of something that's in the woods that you don't want to go near.
It's interesting to hear all of that because I'm a skeptic, but I love listening to it, and it's hard to be skeptical when there's so many different cultures talking about something that's very similar, Yeah. I wonder if there's even maybe like a spiritual component to it, sort of thing,
Yeah, that's the other hard thing is, we don't know very much about Native American religions and belief systems, partially because they didn't really write any of it down. There were very few Native American societies that had written language before the Europeans got here. I think the Cherokee were one of the ones who worked with settlers to create a written form of their own language. But a lot of them didn't write very much down. And the early ethnographers, anthropologists, all of that, who came in and spoke to the natives, they were all Christian. So they had a tendency, even if not on purpose, to sort of portray Native American religion from a Christian standpoint. Like, they were making connections when they heard one great creator being, they're like, oh, these guys believe the same thing as us. So a lot of it gets written down in context that makes it feel almost Christian, but at the same time, a lot is oral tradition that wasn't very well preserved. So it's hard to know for certain, and you really have to go and you have to talk to the people who are living on reservation, still living as close to the way their ancestors did as possible. They're going to know the most. It's, unfortunately, I can't make those trips every time I have to make a video, but I would love to.
Yeah. I think that was an interesting one.
Yeah. What's this? This is such a cool thing that you can do. You can just pull
you can just pull all the comments.
That is so much better than what Streamlabs does. Oh boy.
So another thing I wanted to ask about is, are there any connections between Wendigos and Skinwalkers and the missing 411 national parks theory?
So yes, I have revised my opinion on that over time, though.
Okay.
Originally, it was my opinion that most of these disappearances are related to some sort of creature like that in the national parks, and that the national parks were formed to, basically contain these things. As I've done more and more research into a lot of these cases, far more of them than I ever anticipated have
Roosevelt, right?
Roosevelt founded the National Forest Service, and then the National Park Service branched out of that, I think, in the 40s or 30s. The first national park was Yellowstone in like 1872, though. But the national park system as a federal, project was later. But I mean, Roosevelt, of course, did have his what he called a goblin story about something who was hunting a German man named Bauman. And I can go through that if you'd like. But
yeah, go for it. I haven't heard that.
Yeah, I'll go through it in just a second. But the idea that all of these disappearances are related to something supernatural has very much kind of faded into the background for me, because there's a lot of them where it didn't really seem like something that was supernatural once you dig into the details. Every once in a while, we do come across one where there really is no reasonable explanation for it, like Garrett Bardsley, who was a kid who went missing in the Uintah Mountains up in Utah, and they found nothing of him anywhere. They searched all over this mountain, hundreds of people, found nothing. Not even the fishing rod he was carrying. And had he been attacked by a cougar or something, he probably would have dropped the fishing rod. There would have been a sign of a struggle. There wasn't. He only had to get 150 yards between where his dad and him were fishing and the Boy Scout camp. And he actually almost passed the turnoff for the camp, but his dad calls back to him and goes, no, you missed it. Go right. So his dad saw him basically right before he should have been in view of the camp, and he was nowhere to be found. So there's cases every once in a while like that where I'm like, there's really no rational, simple explanation for how this happened. And then you get these stories like what Bauman told, and Teddy Roosevelt, of course, relaying the story in his own books, which was that he was hunting with a partner, and they were hunting in a spot that was kind of seen as evil because the previous year a group of miners had discovered a couple of half-eaten trappers out there. They figured bears, because there were bears there. So they get up in the mountain, they set up camp, and they go out to do some trapping. And they come back to camp, and the camp's been destroyed. Everything's been thrown around, tents knocked over, all that. They set everything back up. They go to sleep. Before they go to sleep, they notice that there are some footprints. And at first they think it's a bear. But then the other hunter, who goes unnamed in this story, turns to Bauman and says, Bauman, the bear has been walking on two legs. Now, of course, bears do walk on two legs. They do it. However, they typically don't. The reason a bear will stand on two legs is to get a better view of something, to make itself more intimidating. There's a number of reasons that a bear will stand up, but most of their senses are not as acute when they're standing. So, grizzly bears at least. And that's what they thought this was a grizzly. So to say the bear has been walking on two legs, standing on two legs, totally normal. Walking on two legs, weird. I think I can think of exactly one bear in history known to have walked on two legs, and it was not in Idaho. So I think it was in New Jersey or something. But it was a bear that had damaged front paws, so it walked on two legs. Anyway, next day they go out trapping. At one point they split up, and Bauman says he feels like they're being watched and all that. He gets back to camp and he finds his partner is dead, leaned up against a fallen tree, and immediately he just bugs out. Is that evidence of something supernatural? Not entirely, but it is weird. And it's also weird that Roosevelt decided to include that. Did he maybe believe? And my opinion on this is Teddy Roosevelt spent a lot of time in the woods. That guy knew the United States wilderness like it was the back of his hand. He can't come out if he has political aspirations. Keep in mind, this was published, I think, in the late 1880s. He can't come out with if he has political aspirations and say, there's monsters in the woods. What he can do is say that he heard a story. It's just an interesting story from a guy named Bauman, and he can recount that. It's not to say that Teddy Roosevelt absolutely believed in something like Bigfoot, but it's intriguing enough to look into the possibility,
And then he set up the national parks.
Exactly. But with the, I will say the cave system part is weird. A lot of these stories do involve caves. And if there was one place that another species of humans were going to live, or something that likes to hunt humans, caves would probably be the best option, especially now that humans have settled so many places. Interestingly enough, in British Columbia, there's a group, the Coast Salish, the Chehalis people. They have stories of what they called the Saskets. And the Saskets, as told to J.W. Burns by a number of Native Americans from this region, were a tribe or a race of wild men who were taller than us, 6'6", 7 foot, 18 to 22 inch long footprints, very strong, broad-shouldered, broad-latted, creatures, but that some of them could speak human language, and that they were super strong and super fast, but they lived off in the woods, in the mountains, and that what they would do, one of these stories basically is about how a group of young men heard these stories and went out into the woods to look for them, saw an entrance to a cave with a big stone outside of it, went and told the elders about it. The elders were like, oh, that's where the Saskets live. Don't go there. So, of course, being a bunch of young men, they're like, oh, I want to go see the Saskets. They go off to see the Saskets, and they can't find the opening anymore. They eventually realize that the rock that was outside of the opening has now been rolled in front of it.
Mm.
Of course, there is no photographic or videographic evidence of this because it was like 1929, I think is the exact date. But isn't that interesting? How many of these stories involve caves and how many of these stories have another race of humans or near humans that live out in the woods or underground, and how it seems to all kind of concentrate in these mountain and forest areas. I cannot say that is definitive proof that there's something supernatural going on, but it definitely suggests that maybe we're overlooking some evidence of something that doesn't fit the current narrative.
Yeah, there's a really interesting graphic, and it's a map of the United States and where all those cave systems are, and the missing people
almost exactly
are overlaid on top of the cave systems, and all the hot spots are exactly where the cave systems are. Mm-hmm. It's really bizarre.
I think I think we are a little too quick to dismiss the notion that something might be taking people.
So you said that your opinion on this evolved over time. Mm-hmm. So where are you now with it?
Kind of what I just said, where I'm like, okay. I think that we're overlooking some questions that need to be asked about. Let me put it this way. For a very long time, the scholarly opinion has been something called Clovis first. What that meant was that the first people in America were the Clovis culture, a group of people who migrated over from Siberia down to the United States, and they were called Clovis based on a town where a bunch of Native American artifacts were found that matched basically across the U.S. this one specific type of arrowhead and spear point called the Clovis culture. That date was 13,500 years ago. We have since, I think the earliest articles I was finding on it that had anything definitive were like 2012. But in the last 10 years, that date has kind of been challenged a lot because they kept finding stuff that didn't match. And in fact, back in the 1940s, a guy named Frank C. Hibben uncovered a trove of Native American artifacts in the Sandia Mountains in, I think that's New Mexico. And he dated them to 25,000 years ago, 25,000 years old. Keep in mind, 13,500 years was Clovis. He finds 25,000 years. He's ridiculed. He's panned. Everyone makes fun of him. You're crazy. There weren't any people here then. There just weren't. And then, 80 years later, in 2022, almost 80 years later, in 2022, what do we find? We find a human footprint, I think also in New Mexico, if I remember correctly, with a seed stamped into it. Like the footprint, the foot stepped on a seed and pushed it into the ground. They carbon date the seed to 22,000 years ago. Frank Hibben was right. Everyone who insisted on Clovis first was wrong. There's also the fact that an English historian whose name is not not coming back to me at the moment, spoke to the Powhatan tribes and some of the other local Carolina Algonquin groups. And what they told him was that they go and they hunt apes in the mountains. Well, there's been no apes in North America outside of humans for 26 million years. Now, of course, if there were no apes in the Americas for 26 million years, how the hell would they have a word for apes? It's probably not. It's probably they described something to him. And what they described, he understood as non-human. He understood as primates. Keep in mind, these at this time in history, the Native Americans, to the tension that would eventually exist between Native Americans and English did not yet exist. It was starting. It was getting there. There were some conflicts. But it wasn't like the 1780s and 1790s where it was these people are savages. It was, we're calling them savages because they're heathens, because they're not Christians. But they were talking about cities and civilizations, and they took these people seriously. So why the hell did they tell this guy that they were hunting apes? What could that mean? What could that be? In my opinion, they knew what they were talking about. They were describing a group of humanoids who lived out in the mountains. This, of course, would have been the Appalachians, who probably lived in caves, just like the ones that the Salish people were talking about. Again, these are all just connecting dots and painting a picture. I'm not going to claim that I can prove any of this stuff. But I find it fascinating to look at that, and that's where I kind of netted out now is, yes, a lot of these missing 411 cases are explainable at the end of the day. That the likelihood of a rational explanation is higher than the likelihood of a supernatural explanation. Sure. Cases like that would be, Charles McCuller is one, Tom Messick is one, where I went and I looked into it and I was like, this really doesn't feel like it's definitively supernatural. It feels like it's like when it was told, it was some details were left out to make it more mysterious so more people would watch it and all that. So what I've netted out now is every once in a while I come across a case of somebody who has gone out into the woods and disappeared or died in a way that didn't make sense. Those ones, every once in a while, Bart Schleier, the people, the McLeod brothers in Honey River Park, not Honey River Valley, Garrett Bardsley, where there's just no good explanation for how what happened to them happened. With the McLeod brothers, of course, that story is the Valley of Headless Men. These two brothers went and found a really, really, really good gold mine. They were super excited about it. And then they lost all the gold because their raft capsized. They went back. And after a few years, nobody's heard from them. Of course, that wasn't super weird back then. But after like 3 years, that's a long time to not hear anything from your brothers because their other brother was still at home. So he goes off looking for them. What he finds is their campsite. And he finds both their bodies. Both the bodies are missing their heads. One of them appears to have been reaching for a rifle when he died. And then that kind of starts to repeat itself up there over time. The Native Americans of the region were on good terms with those brothers. They were half Native themselves. They were Métis. So it's not... there's nothing about that story that makes it sound like the local natives would have had any reason to attack these people. So what killed them? Well, a lot of people are like, oh, well, it was probably wild animals. First of all, if you look at where this is, those animals would have to swim. They would have to get to where these guys were. Wild animals don't typically swim for no reason like that. Especially, when you're thinking about like a bear, wolves. Are they going to swim across a river to attack two humans? Probably not. It's just not really in their nature. If you're alone in the woods and the bear is right next to you or the wolves are right next to you, then maybe. But even then, it's typically about their territory. They weren't in anything's territory. So what got them? And furthermore, what took their heads and why? Well, animals don't usually take heads as trophy hunting behavior. I've had a few people tell me they do, and that's just simply not true.
They don't leave the rest of the body.
That's the thing is because everybody's like, oh no, animals take heads. And I'm like, no. Animals take everything. They just took the heads. That is human behavior. That is what we do as trophy hunting. Mm-hmm. Like historically across the planet, we do that. That was something human that did that or something near human. And when you look at these caves systems and all of that, it seems entirely too do you know what the number of people it is to have a breeding population? How many people you need? 50. Mm-hmm. You need 50 people for a stable breeding population. Now, when you've got multiple people spread out across territory, tribes, clans, families, then you need even fewer. You need a total of 50 within a certain area to maintain a breeding population. So if you've got one tribe of 15 people and one tribe of 20 people and one tribe of 10 people, little family-sized unit clans, and they every time they need a mate, they just go and snag somebody from another clan, which is how like the Scottish did it, the Irish and the Welsh. When you do that, you don't need 50 people in one cave. You need 10 people in one cave. And then you can go across the world looking for mates and all that. In order to maintain a growing population, I think you need like 500. Otherwise, you start to run into issues with inbreeding and things like that over time. But just a stable breeding population is only 50 people. So you don't need a huge population to keep your species going.
Another thing that I've heard with the cave systems and the missing people, and this is probably just a thing that I ran across on TikTok, was just that it could be like a human trafficking situation. Do you know if there's any credibility to that?
There is to some of them. Not all of these cases match human trafficking, but the MMIW ones specifically, missing and murdered Indigenous women, those are human trafficking seems extremely likely with a lot of those cases for the girls who are never found, because for a very long time, reservation police and state police were not allowed to work together. It was actually illegal for them to work together. And even at the times when it has been legal for them to work together, there's a lot of distrust because, well, for obvious reasons. There's I cannot blame Native American reservations for not trusting the government, especially since I'm
100%.
I'm the guy whose ancestors set up the government, and I don't trust them. So how can I possibly be upset with natives for being a little suspicious? But because of that lack of jurisdiction between the two, the reservation cops couldn't go off reservation, the state cops couldn't go on reservation, so you were in a bind. The only people who could, I think, were like Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Indian Affairs. So there was just the best possible market for human traffickers, especially considering that there are casinos, there are drilling rigs, there are all sorts of little spots where you could pick somebody up and nobody else would notice they went missing. There's a great movie about the entire subject called Wind River. It's Jeremy Renner and Elizabeth Olsen that I recommend everybody watch. Definitely over, I would say 16 at the minimum to watch that movie. Because there's nothing graphic, but there's some pretty intense stuff that goes on. But it's a really good movie that shows kind of these jurisdictional issues and how it takes like a fish and wildlife guy to help track down these killers. So you look at that.
Do you think that that's why Indigenous women were targeted specifically, is because it's so hard for these agencies impossible for these agencies to communicate with each other? And
yep, I think that's a huge. I think it's a huge part of it. I think there are some very evil people in this world who have taken advantage of situations like that. Thankfully, under Trump, believe it or not, there was a task force established to tackle this problem. Biden has thankfully continued it. It's one of the few things that I can look at both those guys and be like, sweet, good job, you guys did something right.
So this has gone on up until very recently, then.
Yeah. Oh, the MMIW thing is extremely current. Unfortunately, because of the tensions between natives and specifically whites, although there's distrust of other races as well, but it's the tension is mostly natives and whites. There's not a ton of resources out there because there's a lot of distrust, there's a lot of tension, And I've reached out to a number of organizations asking, hey, how can I direct people to donate to you? How can I help people fund? What can I do? And there's nothing. I was basically able to compile a list of like 4 or 5 different organizations that try and work on this. Thankfully, the Presidential Task Force seems to be trying its best to get a handle on it. There have also been some new laws and some court decisions that have allowed state and federal police to work alongside reservation police, depending on the case. Like if somebody is kidnapped on reservation land and taken onto state land, then the reservation cops can work with the state cops. If somebody is taken on state land and moved to reservation land, same thing. So it used to be that couldn't happen, that the state police had to be the ones handling it, and that the reservation police had to be the ones handling it. Now they can work together, which is awesome. I really hope that we see some movement on this issue. And then but of course, that's not the only thing that's going on with these missing people. There's people who are, seriously in the wrong place when they're found. And I don't think that's trafficking. But in some cases it is, priests at a Catholic camp molested a kid and he ran up a mountain and died there, or was murdered and taken there. There are stories where it is, like Chris Tompkins we covered recently. I won't say for certain that any of his coworkers did anything to him, but I believe one of his coworkers was eventually arrested for murdering somebody else, or attempting to murder somebody else. And their story doesn't match up at all with what the physical evidence shows. It suggests, when you look at where and when this happened, that his coworkers did something to him. It's that simple. So those cases, it's very cut and dry, and I think it's important that we don't try and pretend those are supernatural. But then when you look at the rest of it, yeah, there might be a trafficking problem. Yeah, there might be the government's testing something problem. There's one guy, Kenny is his name. Can't for the life of me remember his last name though. But Kenny Veach, there we go. He was off hiking in the desert, says he came across a cave that made him feel really weird as he approached it. Like he was vibrating internally. And a lot of people called him a liar. He went out and tried to prove that he found the cave. If you look up Kenny Veach in the M Cave, we have an entire video on it. That was very thoroughly researched. And so what's that? Like, is that a military installation using an active denial system? What are we looking at here? I think trafficking is definitely a part of it in some of these cases, but at the core, what the missing 411 phenomenon is really showing is the ineptitude of our police forces, and not that they're incompetent, but that they just lack the resources to find these people. They don't know where to go. They don't know what to do, and they don't have the necessary funding. Search and rescue efforts are mostly volunteer, especially after 5 days. So how do you confront that? I don't think you can. But I think you can look at the cases where there's people who go missing under truly absurd circumstances. And those are the ones that I think you need to look at and focus on when you're talking about like supernatural stuff. Gotta leave the stuff that is most likely totally normal as most likely totally normal. Otherwise, you're just going to discredit yourself.
Sure. So I want to ask one more question.
Sure.
Maybe two on this subject, and then I want to completely switch gears for a few minutes.
Right. Sure.
All right. So through TikTok, you go through a gauntlet of videos that people send you on Wendigos and skinwalkers and stuff like that, and you tell them whether it's real or not, or you play the game whether it's real or not, that sort of thing. I want to know if you've ran across one that had you convinced.
I will say there's one that comes to mind immediately, which is, it was just a guy like doing a Facebook Live in his living room, just playing around, talking to his friends and all that, and just incidentally catches something out the front door or the window or something. I think the front door was open. Catches what appears to be a very tall humanoid figure running just very fast, like not like 18, 20 miles, like 40, 50 miles an hour. Ooh. Just zips by. And he like almost barely registers it. It's like, what? So that one, just because it was so clearly not planned, I looked at that and I was like, that feels possible.
Don't leave your front door open, guys.
Yeah, more often.
We've learned anything.
Yeah. More often than not, I see something that I'm just like, this person doesn't know what they're talking. Like they made it up and they didn't even bother to do their research before making it up.
Yeah, one of the ones that I saw recently was, you're playing that game and it was them doing the mimicking call from a bathroom stall.
Yeah.
Yeah. That had the potential to be very creepy, though, if you had seen something like behind the door in the stall,
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
I was waiting for the jump scare on that one.
Me too, but it didn't come. But like, it's just, you're getting the lore wrong, dude.
Yeah.
So I gotta say, there's been very few videos of anything, Wendigo related or not, that have ever really made me believe it. Early on, like back in 2021, when I was first making content, before this was a full-time gig for me, when I wasn't doing a ton of my own research, I was much easier to convince. There's a couple that still I'm bugged by. One of which was a very unnatural looking deer in England. That just like its neck was way too long for a deer. It appeared to not have any hind legs. It was a weird video.
Was it dragging itself by its front legs?
No. So that's an entirely, it was just standing, and you could tell it wasn't a hunting target or like a decoy because the ears twitched. Like it's very clearly a real animal. There are videos all over the place of deer that are acting really strangely, but those are typically because of a prion disease that's known as chronic wasting disease. I think it's Creutzfeldt-Jakob in humans, but it's a disease that basically, I don't know how prions work, but it degenerates your brain and basically turns you into a zombie. A lot of the deer, what people refer to as the not deer.
Yeah. If there's anything that you hope that doesn't mutate and pass to humans, that's the one thing.
Currently it's extraordinarily difficult to catch it. It does happen. Mad cow disease is that's what that was back in the 2000s when everybody was freaking out. But you basically have to eat somebody's brain matter to catch a prion disease from them. I think the same goes for deer. You'd have to eat the brains, but you still like you don't eat a deer with chronic wasting disease. If you kill it and you burn it because you don't want it spreading. The fear is that it will spread throughout the deer population and kill most or all of the deer, or worse, spread throughout the deer population, become transmissible to humans, and then you kill and eat a deer and you've got prion disease and we don't know how to kill it. So that's terrifying. But yeah, I mean, to really answer the question, I think because editing has become so easy and so many people are so good at it, I have such a hard time believing when I just see the video. There are people who I've talked to who I've seen the video they made and I've talked to them about it, and then I'm like, okay, now I believe you. But if all I've got is a video to look at, most of the time I do have to err on the side of that's not real because it's too possible to fake it.
I feel like trail cams would catch a lot of action on these things, but you really don't see that too often.
Yeah. And the problem is I've seen a lot of trail cam pics that you can tell that they were doctored. There was one on a Twitch stream I did last week where I basically live doctored an image to look about as real as what they were showing. Took me 5 minutes in Canva, not even Photoshop. Because it was like the deer, obviously a drop shadow behind it. Like, what? Why is that there? Trail cams, I think, are the place you would see it if one was going to get caught. And there have been a few trail cam pictures that have shown up that have been kind of weird, but nothing I've seen yet that has been, certain, I guess. And also the other problem is what we're dealing with here, if it is what I think it would be, which is a subgroup of humans who, maybe migrated here 150,000 years ago, and then nobody else migrated here for a while, and then more people migrated in, and that happens. They would look human. they would probably look too human. Also, they, the stories that we have of these things, they tend to avoid human settlement and avoid human areas. So if people are known to be in an area, they probably won't be there themselves. That said, I think if you set your trail cams up in the right spots, that might be the way to figure this out. Those Saskets, that's the one I'm really. If I were to go trying to prove the existence of one of these creatures, British Columbia is where I'd go. I would start there, or Tennessee.
Dude, you got to do it for the channel.
We're thinking about doing it in Tennessee, yeah, because here's the thing: if I got to choose between British Columbia and Tennessee, I can carry a gun in Tennessee.
True that.
Don't think I'm going to get away with carrying my AR-15 in Canada.
Man, one of my favorite that reminded me, one of my favorite memes is the top portion has these girls doing like messing with Ouija boards and stuff like that. And the bottom half is dudes decked out in their AR-15 and their nods and all that kind of stuff. And across from them is like a Wendigo or a Skinwalker or whatever, some kind of cryptid. And they're like, who keeps summoning these?
The most cursed thing to ever come out of me having a presence on the internet was the number of people who have started using the term Wendussy. I'm not the man who coined the term, but I do appear to be the man who popularized the term. The guy who the first guy I ever saw make the joke was his TikTok was Blackbeard Actual. I think he's changed it since, but yeah, I was like, I stitched it. I was like, I cannot be serious enough about this. Do not try to bang the Wendigo. It does not have a Wendussy. You are in danger. Like, also, it's described as being desiccated and rotting. Why do you want that? And of course, they're all like, for the glory, of course.
Yeah.
Like, well, you know what? All right, well, let's go, boys.
All right, so I want to hard switch gears for a minute. So another thing that I found out is, of course, I knew you through TikTok, but then I randomly heard you on Joshua Smith's podcast, and come to find out, you're a libertarian just like me, and then I saw you on Twitter shortly after that. And I'm like, holy crap, this guy is based. Like, how did I not know this?
You'd be shocked how many of us are.
Like, small world, man.
Yeah.
So how did you said you were a conservative before, and then you kind of made that transition. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey to libertarianism?
Sure. Growing up, I just grew up in a pretty conservative household. It was actually a little split. My mom, I think, voted for Obama the first time. My stepdad has been hardcore Republican my entire life. My dad pivoted pretty far left when I was in high school. So I was in a weird, Kiaroru Go. I think that's how that's pronounced. We do have a Wendussy Hunter ball cap at the lorelodge.shop. Not even kidding. That exists. Yeah. So that's a thing if you want that. But yeah, so I grew up, just kind of leaning to the right, pretty conservative. I also, I have a much younger audience than a lot of people. Mine is primarily, on YouTube, at least 18 to 35. So there's a lot of people, and I'm 25.
Okay. So
there's a younger demographic in there who don't quite remember the 2010s as well as they think they do. Of course, as more and more people are aging into the bar scene and all that, I'm making more and more friends who are 21 years old. A lot of them don't realize that I was a junior in high school when gay marriage was legalized. Like, I grew up thinking the Iraq war was a good thing because that's what they said on TV. So a lot of these, it was a different world and a different time. So I grew up in a more conservative household where I was taught that, gay marriage was not a good thing, and that, America interfering all over the world is a great thing. And, it's what's best for the world. And as I got older, and I'm not going to say that like my parents are stupid or anything, because they're not. They just grew up in a different time. They grew up during the Cold War. So like they had a much different perspective on what America needed to be doing. They thought that we still needed to be the world police, because if we weren't, well, something like the Russians is going to happen again. For me, when I got later into high school and I started making a lot of friends who were gay, bisexual, and I think I was probably a sophomore when the term non-binary started becoming common. I actually didn't know that many trans people at all in high school. And in fact, I still don't know many people I went to high school with who have come out as trans or non-binary. But these things are becoming more and more common. And I was starting to make friends with people who are gay, bisexual, lesbian, all that. And so that started to shift my social views a little bit, because I was like, all right, well, I don't see anything harmful about this. Do what you want to do, I guess. Just don't force me to do it. It's kind of how I started looking at it. And I took that same opinion on most things. And I got into college, and that's when I really started to consider myself more of a libertarian. But even senior year of high school, I think what really did it for me was watching Rand Paul on the debate stage in 2015, 2016, was just watching him go up there and the way he presented ideas. And it wasn't about forcing anybody to do the right thing. It was about giving people the freedom to do the right thing and trusting that they will. And so I started to really become attracted to that idea. And the more I dug into it, the more I was like, wait a second. Why do we need the government telling us what's right and wrong? We don't. We have moral compasses. We have communities. It's never been the government's job to tell you what is morally right and wrong. It's been the government's job to tell you what you can and can't do to other people. You can have a relationship with somebody else. The government shouldn't be involved in that. That is a voluntary, consensual thing. When a relationship is not voluntary or consensual, the government gets involved and says you can't do that. That is rape or kidnapping or assault, any number of different possibilities. And that kind of clicked for me. I think it was that argument of the government is not out there to regulate relationships. They're out there to make sure that people don't harm each other. That's, I think, when it clicked, is that's the only reason for government to exist, is to make sure that people aren't hurting each other. Everything else is just a question of, is this something that a government can more efficiently handle than a community of people? And in almost every single case, the answer is no, the government cannot handle this better than a community of people. If I look in my immediate surroundings, if my federal taxes were cut in half, I could donate to the local art museum. I could, go into the local historic movie theater every weekend. I could go out for dinner every night. I could support the community around me. But instead, I'm giving a whole bunch of money to the government so they can go bomb Russians in Ukraine. Like, the Russians shouldn't be in Ukraine. Don't get me wrong. They shouldn't be there. But why are my tax dollars paying for the bombs? I didn't sign up for that. So, I genuinely hope Ukraine wins. I do. I want that to happen. I think it would be funny if that happened, because Russia's huge. And imagine taking that L. I would love that. But what I can't support looking at it is a government that, when they try and put out a bill that says, hey, for any further money we're going to send over there, we want to know what the plan is for it. We want to be able to trace it. We want to know where it's going, who it's going to, and what's being done with it. And then Adam Kinzinger, who's supposed to be a Republican, gets up there and is like, this is treason. Are you kidding me? I want to know where the money is going is treason? No, it's my money as an American that's being sent overseas to fight a war I'm supposed to believe in. And if I'm going to believe in that war, you better goddamn tell me what's going on. And clearly that's not what's happening, as we know from that kid, Jack Teixeira, leaking all those documents. And of course, everyone's like, oh, well, did you know he's anti-Semitic? And I'm like, I don't. That sucks. That's bad. He shouldn't be. That's stupid. But also, that does not detract from what he put out there. Him being a shitty person does not make the government right. And so that's where I've ended up now, is like, I just have such a deep distrust and hatred for these people who are in power that I can't imagine ever supporting giving them more power, whether the people who are in office right now say they agree with me or not. Because the fact of the matter is, I tell those people that if say we had an entirely libertarian government, 100%, first of all, nothing would happen. Like, the government wouldn't get any more power. But say we gave them the power to make whatever laws they saw fit. Well, the second another party gets into power, they're going to abuse the hell out of it. So I don't want that. And for me, the best way to prevent tyranny is to not give the government the power in the first place. So that's kind of how I landed on libertarianism. Was conservatism, Republicans, they tend to try and wield the power. But the problem is then the Democrats get in and then they try to wield the power. And then they give the government more powers than the Republicans abuse. And it just is a never-ending cycle. And that was actually how a bunch of neo-Nazis in college tried to recruit me to their little club, was to be like, oh, well, no, we're all libertarians too. We need to use force to get there. And I just remember being like, that doesn't sound right.
Force doesn't sound very libertarian.
Like, what do you mean we need it? Huh? Yeah. So, but yeah, that's kind of how I ended up where I'm in, where I am politically. Is I started off conservative, and I realized that even if I had those values, other people didn't necessarily have them, and they shouldn't be criminalized for it as long as they're not hurting anybody else.
That's awesome, man. Well, we're coming up on an hour and 12 minutes.
All right.
So I want to cut it there.
Sure.
I feel like we could talk for another hour on libertarian stuff, but I want to keep it to about an hour and 10 or whatever.
Sounds good to me.
Aidan, I've had a lot of fun talking to you.
It's been nice.
You're so based on Twitter, and I love your content on TikTok. So I hope that we can continue this friendship, and
yeah, I'll be around.
See where that goes. And do you want to plug anything before we go?
I mean, I'm the guy behind the Lore Lodge. That's all I really have to plug right now. We've done a very good job branding ourselves. If you look up the Lore Lodge, you get us. So
it's Lore Lodge on YouTube, and yep. Is it Lore Lodge or Aidan Mattis on TikTok?
So here's the thing. We have both. So I've got my personal, which is I'm the Aidan Mattis on Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, all that stuff, except for Twitter. And then I'm also the Lore Lodge on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. We have both, because I know a bunch of content creators who tweet their personal opinions from their content creator account, and it makes me unfollow them. So I was like, you know what? If you want to follow my Lore Lodge account, I'm going to make that a separate thing where I'll tweet about lore and folklore and history and all that. And then on my personal, I will do all my personal stuff. So Instagram, though, is pretty much the same, both sides.
Gotcha. Awesome. Well, guys, go buy his merch.
Oh, the Wendusy cap. Yeah.
Obviously, if you're here, you found me on YouTube, but on Twitter, I'm Liberty Denton with a 0 instead of an O. And on TikTok, you can find me at Speak for Yourself Podcast. All right. Thanks, guys.